Hi, I'm Sumaya Brown. I'm Les Brown's baby girl, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you on my father's behalf, Mr. Richard Villasana. Richard is a hero in human form. Richard Villasana is the founder of Forever Homes for Foster Kids. It is a leading international authority on immigration issues and foster families. A proud Navy veteran, Richard has been featured on CNN International, Associated Press, ABC TV, Wish TV, Costco Connection, and the Washington Post. He is a columnist with Foster Focus magazine and an international speaker. Richard was honored as a California hero. He has translated for the United Nations. He is a leading advocate for Latino foster children in the US and featured on Latino media, including Univision, Telecuento FA, the world's largest Spanish language media company. For 3 decades, his nonprofit has worked with government agencies across the country to find families for foster and immigrant children to create a permanent home. He is the best-selling author of the book, Do No Harm, about the children's separations at the Mexico-US border from 2017 through 2021. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Richard Villasana. Richard, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, it's just a joy. My father, he said, we have to put this out, and he wanted to share your story. I'm so grateful to your mutual friend, Mario Lopez, who connected you and my father, Les Brown, a motivational speaker, also given up at birth with his twin brother. And so he has a very special relationship with foster children and with children who have been adopted because he has stood in those shoes. And even as an adult, even as a senior, he still stands in those shoes because he will never forget what it was like going through life and dealing with the issues and challenges that you can overcome, but that you do experience when you are adopted or when you are a foster child. And why we are so excited to have you today, Richard, is because of your angelic, heroic relationship that you have, this cause that you are working towards to make sure that children and teenagers are reunited with their families. That is a special calling that is so needed in this world. And I'm sure that for years to come, you will continue to hear and see the effects of the work that you have been doing. This is good work. And in a society where we have so many selfish people who are self-absorbed, it's always good to have good news and to encounter good people who are doing good things. And so thank you so much again for joining us.
Oh,
And so
you're welcome.
I just want to ask you a few questions. How did you get into this work? What drew you to it? What was the connection that you woke up one day and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I'm going to pursue this work. Just tell us about who you are and what drove you to pursue this.
Well, who I am is the oldest brother of 9. And so I always had a sense of responsibility. And what got me into doing this work, there's actually 2 parts. The first one is having someone who pointed out to me that I had a gift. And that was a mentor of mine. We were doing international marketing. I was doing business all throughout Latin America with all the countries that spoke Spanish. And he saw me in action. He saw me find officials and people. And it was very easy for me. And so I didn't give it much thought. I didn't think of it as a gift. And fortunately, he stopped me one day and said, look, you have this gift. And I said, well, I do this all the time. It's so easy. He said, doesn't matter, doesn't diminish the gift. You still have it, and you can still do this to benefit people. And then what happened is that people did start to ask me to do things personally, to say, can you find a brother I haven't seen in 5 years? Can you find, a friend of mine or an uncle I haven't seen in 10 years? And all of a sudden, foster care agencies started calling me up and said, we hear that you find people outside of the US and Latin America. And so it was more of kind of pulled into it. Wasn't like I woke up at 9 years old. I said, I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to be a firefighter. this was not on my radar, but it was kind of a slow pull of events that got me into doing this. And there was a person who called me 12 years ago, and he is very well known in the US. And he introduced himself to me and he said, "Look, I train counties across the country how to locate people. And I can tell you, they don't know how to do this internationally. So the children are staying in foster care for years until they turn 18 years old and age out. And what that means is they end up on the streets, homeless, broke. Most of them at 24 still don't hold down a job. Many of them haven't graduated high school, and they've got to find a place to live, find a job. Terrible outcomes. And so my work has always been, let's try to reunite these children with a relative before we have to worry about them aging out and coming up with these expensive programs. Let's do that right the first time. Let's get them out and back. And can I share a quick story with you?
Yes, please.
So this is an example of what the type of work that I do. It's called family finding. So there was a girl, she was 15 years old. She was in foster care for just 3 months, which is great. Something happened to her mother, so the girl was in foster care. She didn't know of any other relatives in the US, but she had family living in the Dominican Republic. Now, all she knew was the names of a couple of uncles and a couple of aunts. She had no date of births. She couldn't tell me which region in the Dominican Republic, no cities, no phone, nothing. That's all we knew. 2 uncles, 2 aunts, and that they lived in the Dominican Republic. But because I've been doing this for 30 years, we were able to get the contact information for her favorite uncle, get that to the caseworker in less than 48 hours.
Wow. You've been doing this for 30 years, which tells me that you've been doing this before we had Google, before we had YouTube, before we had Facebook, before we had Instagram. So, what were some of the challenges that you faced early on without having the internet that we have today while you were locating these relatives and reuniting these families?
Well, that was part of my, I guess, bend or gift that I love research. So we had worked throughout Latin America. I did business with every major government agency in Latin America. I did work, import and export, and worked with hospitals, shipping equipment. So I had done all this work in doing government contracts. So I had this wealth of background. And so I was able to call up people and get them to give me information on someone else, even if I didn't know who that was. And just through networking, be able to find this. And I will share this. I wasn't going to, but since you phrased it that way, my mentor, this is the moment that really shifted things. He came to my desk one day and he dropped a piece of paper and said, like, Barry Johnson. I said, "What's this?" He said, "I want you to find this person." Okay. Where is he? He's in the United States. He works for the Department of Commerce. Huge, huge organization here. He's in Washington. That's all I know. This is before Google. See what you can do. So later in the day, I dropped a piece of paper back off and he said, "What's this?" I said, "It's the phone number." He said, "What phone number?" I said, "The phone number you asked me for." And he says, he looks at his watch. "That was 5 minutes ago." I said, "Well, yeah, I tried to be fast." And I didn't understand. He was in shock because it was only 5 minutes without Google. And he said, "Okay, tell me what you did." So I explained. I said, "Well, I called Maria at the Economic Development Center, and she called John in Washington. We talked for a moment. He got me to Suzanne, and Suzanne gave me the number." I'm thinking, job done. I'm ready to go back to work. And he's like,
Wow.
"That's that's amazing. I've never had anyone do that." And I said, "I do it all the time." And I'm like, "Job done. I've got work to do." And he said, "You're not listening to me." And I knew him so well because we'd worked together and I respected him that I kind of like chilled, calmed down. And I said, okay, what am I missing? He said, I have never seen anyone who did and can do what you just did.
Mm.
And that was the person. If he had not done that, I would not be doing this work because I would not have given it the importance that he saw that it had to be able to find people like that with just little pieces of information. So it's been interesting. I do love Google, but surprisingly, we don't use Google. Google is
Mm.
not our go-to
Wow.
tool.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice for research, but I do a lot more work local, down at the city level, going through officials. And again, a lot of it's cultural knowledge, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of it's knowing the language,
Yes.
knowing how to talk to these officials
Mm-hmm.
properly, giving them the respect that they don't get from many companies
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and from many people more north. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm kind of like a breath of fresh air that they're like, oh,
Yes.
I will help you. And
Mm-hmm.
they do. They are amazing people who do this out of the goodness of their heart because they're still running their government, but they're
Mm-hmm.
helping me to make these connections so we can reunite these children and get them out of foster care.
Richard, this is so fascinating to me. As I told you, I used to be a teacher and I used to teach different subjects. And one of the subjects that I used to teach was English as a second language in California. So just hearing about students or children and teens being reunited with their families, it just means something to me. And I'm just wondering as I hear you speak, because you and I think so many heroes don't really think of themselves as heroes. And I think it keeps you humble because you don't realize how awesome you are and how extraordinary the work is that you're doing. Because you, even before we recorded, you're just casually like, yeah, and I found this person and that, and you just, it's not even a big deal to you. And I'm sitting there like, what? Just like the guy was when you came back and just put the name and the phone number on that person's desk. And so my question to you is, on a personal level, early on or even now, do you find that when you find a child or a student, like what's going through your mind? What do you feel? Or at least early on, what was it that you were feeling that caused you to say, wow, I did it? Like, do you feel a sense of relief, or what is it that goes through your head and your heart when you reunite these families?
I would definitely say relief because every case is unique and we want the children to be reunited with a relative.
Mm.
And also to clarify, even though I find relatives throughout Latin America, in the vast majority of cases, they know someone else in the US.
Wow.
So I'll give you another quick story.
Oh,
There
yes.
were three girls, 4, 8, and 10, and they
Mm-hmm.
were in foster care. And they had told the caseworker that they had two aunts living in Chicago, but
Mm-hmm.
they weren't old enough to have phone numbers and they couldn't give enough information for the caseworker to find these two aunts. But they were able to give them a little information about finding relatives in Mexico.
Mm.
So they came to my nonprofit. Took us a couple of weeks. We got the information. So the caseworker on a Saturday with a translator had the phone number and she's calling down to Mexico and she gets one of the uncles and she's talking to him and says, by the way, do you know anything about these two aunts living in Chicago? And he says, wait a minute. And then a few seconds later, a woman's voice comes on the line, and the caseworker introduces herself and explains what's going on and says finally, do you know anything about two aunts from Chicago? And she goes, well, yes, I do. I'm one of them. They were
Wow.
sitting in the living room having coffee. They had flown
What?
in that week, were visiting the family, and that's when the phone call came in. And of course, the caseworker was like, oh my God. She said, 17 years. I've never had anything like this happen. The aunt said, hey, we're going to be back on Tuesday.
Mm.
Let's make it happen. That's where the girls went. And that has happened, as far as I know, every case I've ever worked. There's always been someone in the US either that people couldn't find or didn't know existed, that because of my work, those relatives were able to give that information to the caseworker. And three girls went to live in Chicago. I've had another teen went to live with her two aunts in Los Angeles. Another girl went to live with a great uncle and great aunt. This happens all the time. So it's relief, happiness that we did it, but unfortunately I might need to stay in that thought a little longer, because then I'm thinking, who's the next one? Because it's really one child at a time when you're doing this work. You save one child at a time, change their life, and they don't know me. They don't know my team. They don't know that we're the people that made it happen. And that's okay. It's not important that they know my name or the name of my organization. What's important is that their life has been changed, so they're now on the right path with people that love them, with family. That's the most important thing.
Yes, that sounds like a divine appointment. It sounds like you've had a series of divine appointments where things just seem to connect and fall into place, where you had the two aunts who just so happened to be sitting there in the living room when that call came. And I just want to thank you again. There's something that my father said, and it was said to him, and he says it to his audience, and he lives by this. He says, you have greatness within you. And Richard, you have greatness within you. And not only do you have greatness within you, but you are doing a great work. And I want to salute you and thank you for the work that you are doing and how you are impacting these lives. I want to encourage our audience to get the book, Do No Harm, by Richard Villasana, available on Amazon. Do No Harm by Richard Villasana, available on Amazon. I want to thank you again for doing your pro bono work that you do with the government. So we definitely want to encourage our listening audience to look up Forever Homes for foster kids, and please consider giving to them. It is a nonprofit organization. Again, it's Forever Homes for foster kids, led by Richard Villasana. Again, his book, Do No Harm by Richard Villasana, available on Amazon. And Richard, again, I want to thank you for doing the good work, the great work, for operating in your greatness. And who knows, you might have found the very next Les Brown, the very next president, the very next whoever they are supposed to be. And it's because of your work and your diligence in reuniting these families that you are giving children and young people and even the adults what they need to push through in a very cold world. You're adding warmth. And so I thank you again.
You're so very welcome.
Thank you so much. And we look forward to all that you are going to continue to do. Okay. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And please tune in for more interviews on Les Brown's channel. Thank you.